welcome to visitors, our viewers. We have very few visitors, but viewers that are interested in the notice of intent that we are filing for the MS4 Stormwater Management Program that EPA has mandated that we undertake. Before we get going, can we start? Maybe we should just start around with you and state who you are and why you're here.
My name's Kristen Grubbs. I live on Elm Street in Byfield, so I'm here as an interested citizen, and also work for the Ipswich River Watershed Association, helping communities with water regulations. So kudos to Newbury for having this meeting tonight, and interested to hear more about your work.
All right.
I'm Tracy Blaze. I'm the town administrator for the town of Newbury.
That's about all you have to say, isn't it? It says it all right there. I'm Joan O'Connell, Stormwater Committee Chair.
And I'm Yvonne Buswell, I'm Stormwater Committee.
I'm Martha Taylor, Town Planner and Stormwater Committee.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we get into the specifics, I'd like to talk a little bit about the genesis of this whole program. You're the only person I can ask. Have you ever been in Cleveland? Have you ever visited Cleveland?
I've never been.
Well, you know the old joke, if the doctor tells you you have only 6 months to live, you move to Cleveland, because that way it feels like 6 years. That's very unfair. I actually lived in Cleveland for 2 real years, and it's quite a nice city. But they have had their problems in the past. In June, back in 1969, and actually I remember this because I was working in Australia at the time, and Time magazine put a huge spread on this. The Cuyahoga River caught fire. And that wasn't like that was the first time, that was the 13th time that river had caught fire since the 1840s. So every 15 to 20 years, the river catches fire. This time, it was a train that went by and flicked a spark into the river. Now, this river runs along the side of Cleveland, downtown Cleveland, and it's a heavy industrial area, both sides of the river, and, you know, the old story was the solution to pollution is dilution, so they would dump everything into the river, and the river was an awful mess. Anyway, it caught fire in '69. And somehow that particular thing, maybe helped by the Time article, that galvanized public opinion to the point, this is ridiculous. You can't have rivers catching fire, for heaven's sakes. This is stupid. So the next thing that happened was the EPA was formed in 1971, I believe it was. And the year after that, the Congress passed the Clean Water Act, which was the beginnings of a program to clean up our waters, make our waters, at the very least, swimmable. When I was a kid, Newburyport dumped all of their sewage right along with their stormwater into the Merrimack River. I was not allowed to swim on the outgoing tide. I could swim on the incoming down by Plum Island Point, but folks wouldn't. And my father had been active in the Red Cross in doing testing, so he knew whereof he spoke. The Merrimack River was dreadful. Well, now, fast forward 50, 60, 70 years, the feds pushed us to the point there, just about everybody now that needs a sewage treatment plant has one. They don't all work terrifically. There's several problems upstream, and we're getting the ill effects of it. Several plants having difficulty because they never separated their storm sewer from their sanitary sewers. So now the storm water runs into the plant, come a heavy rainfall, it overwhelms the plant, they open up the valves and let it all flow through, and it flows right by Plum Island Point. And I'm getting blamed for it because I'm involved in stormwater. I'm finding this is all my fault. People are seeing very disgusting sections of the river. They're out fishing, and Lawrence or Haverhill or Manchester has just opened up their valves. It's not a pretty sight at all. Anyway, generally speaking across the country, the sewage in the river problem got pretty much taken care of. Today, something in the 70 to 75% of all water pollution comes from stormwater runoff. Water that falls on, say, a parking lot or a roof, runs off, and in running off, it picks up all the residue from cars, it picks up heavy metals, picks up hydrocarbons, picks up garbage, picks up the ice cream cone your kid dropped, and down it goes to the river. And probably something in the order of 30 years ago, the EPA started to tackle that one. And they've been very mild so far. Right now, we're working under a permit that allows us to discharge our stormwater, and that permit goes back to 2003. A couple of months ago, the new permit just kicked in, and that will run for 5 years, and in exchange for being allowed to dump our stormwater into the waters of the U.S., there are certain things that we have to do, and those are the things that are spelled out in this notice of intent. And any questions you have at this point, or criticisms or whatever, please. Okay. The notice of intent basically is a things to do list. There are 6 main categories. We'll go through them one by one, but they start out with public education and participation into basically people things to raise the awareness of the issue, hopefully in just about everybody's mind, because almost everybody is in a position to add to the problem. Dumping stuff down catch basins, washing your car and letting it run into the nearest creek. That's the kind of a thing that we all are in a position to do, and we're also in a position to stop doing it if we realize, you know, the problems we're causing. So this first task is public education. We're obligated to send out messages of some sort to 4 different audiences: public at large, developers and contractors, obviously, because they're in a position to, you know, create a lot of silt going into rivers and streams. Commercial operations, gas stations, and so forth, and industry. Now, Newbury does not have any industry. Strictly speaking, our marinas are industry, but they are not in the area that is governed by this particular program. But we do have the other 3, and we will be doing such things as giving talks. Let me just back off a bit. We are not big enough to have the usual things. We don't have a Rotary Club, we don't have a Chamber of Commerce, we don't have a group of industrial people that we can talk to. There's no Greater Newbury Realtors Board. So we're kind of having to piggyback on Newburyport's. And that works out fine because we have a deal with Newburyport where we do their public education and they do our pathogen testing in the sewage treatment plant. That's the one test we have to do that you need a sizable lab for. So anyway, we have to do 2 of these. The public education things are simply brochures scattered around, talks to various organizations. For example, as I told the group earlier, I'm speaking to Rotary and the Chamber of Commerce next month sometime. Rotary the 25th, and I don't know when the Chamber is going to have their breakfast meeting. I had a stall at Old Fashioned Sunday in Newburyport. I'm emphasizing Newburyport because Newbury doesn't have an Old Fashioned Sunday to have a stall at. So the greater Newburyport area is effectively a community. We have different governments, we have different this and that, different names on our fire trucks, but basically we go to Newburyport to shop, basically. And there was one time when the Newburyport Area Industrial Development Group, 80% of the members of that group Those are the people that ran the industrial park in the report. 80% of the members all live in Newbury. So, the public involvement is the second thing. One aspect of that is forming a citizens committee and have citizen volunteers doing work. We have that. We have had volunteers. Yvonne has organized school kids, Triton students, to do tasks. Yvonne has done a tremendous amount of work in putting testing plans together and actually doing testing and training testing. Right now, she's in the process of training some Dpw employees to test waters, which I'll get into. That's the next main task. But in other words, stir the pot a little bit and get as many people involved in this program as we can. Not just listen, but also take part and do. The third thing it's got a long name. It's called Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination. And that is basically do enough testing of the water, the storm water that flows out of our outfalls. And incidentally, every time I say that word, somebody tells me to define it. An outfall is the big pipe where the storm water that goes off the road into the catch basins, underneath the road, and into the creek or the river. That's where it comes out. The outfall is the last point within the town before our stormwater enters the public domain. And that involves a considerable amount of testing. We have, roughly speaking, about 100 outfalls in the area that we are concerned about, that we have to evaluate. We don't, strictly speaking, have to test at every one of those outfalls, but we're going to try to. But we do have to evaluate them. We have to look for any signs of something other than stormwater coming out of them. If we see something like that, we need to track it up the stream. And up the stream in Newbury isn't very far, because most communities, larger communities, have a whole string of manholes and catch basins all feeding into one outfall. In many cases, we have one catch basin, one outfall. It's right there. And at worst, we have a string of catch basins, maybe 6 or 8. So there's not a long way to go to track any particular problem upstream. But we have to do not only the visual inspection, we have to test for chlorine, which is an indication that somebody has dumped their swimming pool into the nearest catch basin and pumped it out. And that can be an awful surprise for marine organisms. Fish don't deal well with huge slugs of chlorine, obviously. Detergents, likewise, that provides froth on the top of a river, which is not pleasant, and it also doesn't do a thing for fish. Ammonia is the third test. That usually is an indication that there's a septic system problem, not always, but frequently, and that too can cause considerable grief to any organism living in the river. We have to test for conductivity, which is basically how well does the water conduct electricity. And fresh water shouldn't conduct electricity at all, so if we have some conductivity, that is not good. The reason we would have it would be because metals of some sort, and we all hear about heavy metals, mercury, et cetera, being very bad for everybody's system. So that's a way of picking up if there's a discharge of heavy metals. And then finally, we have to test for pathogens, E. coli and fecal coliform, and the source of them would be a malfunctioning septic system, or perhaps a leak in the sewer in the Plum Island area or along Plum Island Turnpike. So that's it. We have an obligation to find it and see what we can do about fixing it. The fourth one is a case of, I'm sorry, let me get back. 4 and 5, always, I invariably have them backwards. The fourth one is keeping construction sites basically free of silt washing into a water body, washing into a catch basin, and hence into the river. The problem with silt is it carries, besides being harmful in itself, it fills up the bottoms of streams, wipes out vegetation, but worse than that, it's a mechanism for getting various other contaminants into the river. They will cling to the silt and they'll be passed into the streams along with the silt. So we have already passed a bylaw that allows a town to regulate erosion control and siltation, and the Conservation Commission mostly does that. And it also provides that we have further something we haven't done and we will have to, and that is job site debris, just construction debris, keeping that under control. We do not have a bylaw for that one. We're going to be obligated to have one in the next year or so. And the main enforcer of that one will be the Conservation Commission. The next one is our own town rules and regulations. We are fortunate, ours were, when this program started, in reasonable shape. There were a few things we needed to tweak, and we have already, but there are some communities that require streets that are way too wide. If a street is wider than it has to be, it's going to generate more runoff, which is going to find its way, and carry stuff with it into the stream. Not good. The name of the game is to have as little impervious surface as we can. Obviously, streets have to be paved, but they don't have to be 50 feet wide in a town like this. And right now, we're at the minimum that the fire department is happy with, and obviously the fire department gets to win all the arguments in terms of public safety and the convenience of being able to pass 2 wide fire trucks, one going one way and one going the other. But we're at that threshold now, so we are not paving too much. Our rules and our subdivision rules and regulations have been revised over the past couple of years. There were some things that were left over from another generation that had to be removed, and but that has been done. Site plan review regulations also have been fixed, and we have revised again, and we will be revising in the future continuously our illicit discharge and siltation erosion control regulations. And those regulations apply not just to the area controlled by this program, but the entire town. And the purpose of that basically is so that we are not shooting ourselves in the foot with our own regulations that are contrary to the ends that we're trying to reach. Finally, we're having to clean up we're asked to clean up our own housekeeping practices, primarily those of the DPW, which, quite honestly, we are way better off, and we are far cleaner without this program at all than many communities. For example, a lot of communities have their winter salt stored outdoors. No, we've got a barn that stores the salt. It is not stored outdoors in the rain. We clean out catch basins annually anyway. We did this long before this program took place. Some communities don't do that quite as religiously as we do. we sweep our streets, and not every community does that, but those are the things we've been told to start doing. Well, the good news is we're already doing these things. We will have to write a number of documents. There's a lot of elements of the television program Paper Chase involved here. We need to do 2 plans that affect the DPW. One is the operation and maintenance one, and the other one is to deal with response to spills. The state has all kinds of rules, but the question is, what are we going to do as a town, as the first responders, should we have a spill, and how we can keep that from happening in the first place. We need to do an overall stormwater program which takes this document, which is a things to do list, and expands all of these and goes into far more detail than we have on these sheets, and says basically what is Newbury's plan for improving the quality of our receiving water bodies. The Parker River, Plum Island River, the Little River, and we don't have anything at the moment flowing into the Mill River, but it also is, it's a tributary to the Parker River, and it's something we need to keep an eye on. That is the most I've talked in a long time at once. I talk a lot, but not without being interrupted and told I said the wrong thing. So, most of this is not news. Probably it's not news to you because you've been working with this in other communities as part of your work at Ipswich River Watershed Association. But are there any questions from anybody on what? Let's have some questions because they may be ones that people watching this might have themselves. Anything I didn't cover that needs to be expanded?
Well, John, you mentioned that the MS4 covers a certain part of town, but not all of town.
Right.
Can you just talk about that a
Yeah,
little?
I just sort of touched on that, but the so-called MS4 is an acronym for Municipal Small Storm, or Small Municipal Storm Sewer.
System.
That's it.
System.
That's it, system.
That's it, yeah, systems, thank you. And so we use the MS4 to cover a lot of things. The permit is the MS4. The area for which this program applies is the MS4. And it's based upon census tracts. It is the area that the feds, in their wisdom, consider would be most likely to be providing a problem for our water bodies. And it's a one-size-fits-all. It's unfortunate. The feds have done the best they could. And instead of making everybody do everything everywhere, they've done the sensible thing and say, okay, communities only have so many resources. Let's make them put these resources where they'll do the most good. And that is, in general, it's worked out pretty well. For example, Newburyport is highly developed. Most of Newburyport is in the MS4 area. The industrial park, which is the least dense, but that's in it, and virtually all of the commercial area. All of Plum Island is. In Newbury, it's a little different. It's a little frustrating because I mentioned earlier we have no industry. According to federal regulations, a marina is industry. Marinas are notoriously, they do the best they can. It's not the fault of the marinas, but the people that park their boats there are not that awful fussy about how they deal with their waste. And they are notoriously bad polluters, not the marinas. And the marinas have facilities and try to encourage their boaters, their renters of dock space to do the right thing. It doesn't always work. Guess what? We got 4 of them in the Parker River, and Parker River is not in the MS4 area. Consequently, we have no industry. because the only industry we have in town besides marinas is the Lowells, and they employ 2 people. You know, it's really not like downtown Cleveland. So, there's other anomalies such as one side of the street, which is virtually empty, is in the MS4. The other side of the street, this wall-to-wall houses, is not. Go figure. Anyway, that it is what it is, and it's nobody's fault. It's just kind of the way things are in the federal government. They needed something, and this all goes back to the Clean Water Act, and there are certain things that are allowed and certain things that are not. And I don't think many of us have any idea what they are or why they are, but we have not a voice in this. It's a question of just grin and bear it. So, the areas in Newbury, Orchard Street, no. Most of Central Street is, Elm Street is not, except for Triton. You pointed out to me, Yvonne, that I had entirely misread the plan. I thought Triton was out, which I thought was kind of outrageous in itself, because we all know how tidy teenagers are in their parking lots with their cars, right? But anyway, it is, Triton fortunately is in the MS4.
Is Governor's?
Pardon?
Is Governor's? a
No, it
good
is
one?
not. Again, it's the system. Where do all the kids live permanently? Not at Governor Dummer.
Right.
They all have homes. They are counted as people in their parents. The parents, you know, when the guy comes around for the census taking, how many kids do you have? I got 2. Well, they're both going to Governor Dummer, and they're living at Governor Dummer most of the year.
Right.
But they get counted in East Whoopwop, wherever they come from.
But just interesting that Triton is and Governor's isn't in terms of large parking lots and
It's, a
impervious
lot has to
pavement and
do
all that.
with the way the borders of the census tracts.
Yeah.
I can only guess that Birch Lane and there's a heavily developed section of Central Street right next to Triton.
Yeah.
I can only, that probably provides enough bodies per acre
Right.
to rate it as part of the MS4. I don't know this, I'm just guessing.
It is based on that census.
I'm sorry?
It is based on that census.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
Sure.
track and
Sure.
how they determine it.
sure,
So
but I don't know how that is.
after the next
It
census,
could
'cause it's-
change in another.
Oh, yeah,
decade.
well, it changed a
That's
little
the
bit,
2020.
between, in the time that I've been involved, Yvonne and I have been involved. When this started, it was 2010, when I first got involved. And the word from EPA was, this will be effective in, by March of 2011. And what year is it now? 2018? And it just started 3 months ago. But that would be it was still the 2000 census. Now, the most recent census is the 2010 census.
Right.
And since then, there have been small changes. Didn't make a big difference to our lives, but there were some tweaks to the map.
Right. If anybody's interested, it's easy to Google it if they want to look up the
Yeah.
MS4 map and
Yeah.
actually see the areas in town that it covers.
Actually, that's something we could probably put on the website.
Yeah, I think
It wouldn't hurt.
that would be good.
It would be
It's
a good
little-
idea, yeah.
The new one's a little harder to read than the old one.
I'm sorry?
The new one's a little harder to read than the old one was, but it's still, you can tell the general areas.
Well, yeah, if it's yellow versus white, you can work it out. Yeah, it's not great, but it's doable.
Do
Yes.
you wanna talk at all about funding, how we're going to move some of these initiatives forward, how the town plans to pay for it?
Well, we're doing the best we can to not cost any money, okay? But we can't avoid it entirely. We have costs for printing brochures, we have costs for publicizing other meetings. This one was not a public hearing per se, but we will have to have one for the plans that I mentioned, or at least some of them. We have expenses for the chemicals, the reagents, the equipment that we need to do the testing. We had to outfit a small, make a small room down at the DPW barn as a lab. That was an expense. So far, it has been coming out of the general fund for the most part. Some of it has come from other years. What's the expression? Free cash,
Free cash.
from previous
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
I push for that because I'm not used to not being a government kind of person. I'm not used to money disappearing. You think you have it in the bank, and there's somebody that takes it away from you every 30th of June. And I can't get my head around that. But that is a reality of public finance. And I push to get as much money that doesn't go away, which would be the free cash. That money we get to keep. And if we don't spend it this year, then we spend it next year, or whenever we have to. Or better yet, we don't spend it at all. There's another expense, which is the DPW employees, the guys that work for James. We're not hiring anybody new. And it kind of works out that the best seasons for testing are the times when James has the least pressure. He's paving in the summer, he's plowing in the winter, and you can't test in the winter anyway, and in most summers, it's too dry to have any flow in your, any meaningful flow in your culverts anyway, or your outfalls. But in the spring and the early fall, the paving is done, the plowing is done, and he can put these guys to work doing this. And I think that's very, very fortuitous. It works out very well. So that is, clearly that's probably dollar-wise our biggest expense. But we're not in a position to lay people off after the last snowstorm and then put them on again 2 months later when the paving starts. That doesn't work. So that works out just fine. We have other expenses such as our membership in the Stormwater Collaborative, which the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission started. And I think that's terrific. I think that's worth our membership in all by itself in the Merrimack Valley Planning Commission area. We meet once a month, mostly public works directors, a few of us oddballs that are not DPW guys, and virtually everybody else is a DPW director. And the guys get to talk to each other, trade ideas, not necessarily about stormwater. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in those meetings that is general DPW, like the area-wide purchasing, which obviously is far more efficient in many cases than towns purchasing things themselves. That expense comes out of the stormwater budget. We have a program that I gotta confess, I don't begin to understand, but mercifully Yvonne does. And the guys that are doing the testing, all being probably a third or less of my age, they are all picking it up like that. To me, it's sort of like witchcraft. But it's a system where we can record by computer on a tablet the results, and somehow they're in a cloud somewhere, you know. And there's an expense in getting that set up. Merrimack Valley did this for us, getting that set up, and it needs to be maintained and tweaked regularly, and that's a further expense. There has been discussions. You want to bring up stormwater utilities? There have been discussions about that as a source of income. Personally, I'm not a fan. I think it's a great idea. It has worked very well in many cases, in all fairness. Not a lot of those cases were small New England towns, okay? And we are not at all, there's a lot of things us and Chattanooga, Tennessee do not have in common, okay? I think it would be a very hard sell, and it's all taxpayers' money anyway. And it doesn't look like, so far, it does not look like this permit is gonna break the bank. The funding that I've gotten so far, I think, has been extraordinarily generous. I don't expect that we will be spending it all the way it's lined out. And that does not seem to be collapsing anything. So I think that, frankly, I think the need to pursue that just isn't there at the moment. We've got a system that works. If it ain't broken, fix it.
John, to that end, do you want to talk a little bit about the fact that the current permit is for planning purposes and future will actually be...
I said for now. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's a very good point though, Martha, to elaborate on. Right now, all we are doing is a paper chase. We're doing testing, that's real. But there's very little in terms of retrofits that we have to do on this permit for the next 5 years. We do have to plan. We have to assemble a list of 5, it's a to-do list of 5 things that we would like to do if we get to it. We have no obligation to do them in the next 5 years. As an example, when Main Street was paved around downtown Byfield, there was a section that used to be paved and now is not. That is downhill from most of Lunch Street. That would be a terrific spot to have a rain garden, an infiltration facility, so that the water, instead of getting into a catch basin and going straight, untreated into the Parker River, that water can go into the ground. The root system of the plants can get at it, take up some of the contaminants, and generally filter out the silt that washes down with it. Those things are very effective in terms of removing pollutants. And that, of course, is only a small thing, small part of Byfield, but, you know, it's a start. Another thing that had occurred to me, yeah, we got a salt barn, that's terrific. When they're loading out the trucks with salt, the truck is parked outside. The loader trams its way in, grabs a load of salt, brings it out, bucket goes up, discharges into the body of the truck, and no matter how good the guys are, how hard they try, some salt goes everywhere, okay? I'd like to see some sort of a cover over that, so that could be done it could be done in a contained area, so that salt could be swept up at the end. Right now, there's no particular point because it's everywhere. And if it rains or snows, I mean, a lot of times they're loading salt trucks. It's snowing out, duh. You know, that's when you're plowing and sanding, salting. And so once that salt touches the snow, it starts to dissolve, and you're not going to capture it then. All the sweeping in the world won't help you. That's, you know, these are all hypotheticals. These are not in the program at all at the moment. And the town will have to have a dialogue as to what those 5 things that we have to identify what those 5 things are. And, you know, again, this is just me talking. With climate change, we are going to have problems with wells. There will be parts of town where there will be saltwater intrusion. It's already happening in some parts of town that are close to the salt marsh. As the water level rises, it's going to force its way. You know, the salt water is heavier than fresh water, obviously, and it finds its way under the lens of fresh water where the wellhead, where the pump is. And as a result, eventually the wells start to taste briny, and then eventually they get to the point where they're unusable for people buying water or hauling water. You know, this may be totally unrealistic, but the thought I have is somewhere in the general vicinity of where these problems exist, get ourselves a bunch of these rain gardens to recharge the aquifer, pump from there and distribute as necessary. So we've got an upland source of water that will not be threatened by saltwater intrusion because it's high enough to not be. All you gotta do is be higher than the other water. Mercifully, water will always flow downhill. And it will flow with certainty. You can take that one to the bank. That is a twofer. It helps other problems, and it also would get us all kinds of points in the future with EPA. Right now, all of this is speculative. All we know is that we have been asked to identify potential projects that will actually cost money to do. We haven't been told to do it yet. But you know, you put two and two together, the next permit that hopefully will kick in, well maybe will kick in 5 years from now, that may very well contain the requirement that we start doing rain gardens, detention ponds, and this and that in various spots that we don't have them. Did I miss something on that particular issue, Martha? That was a good point.
No, that was,
Yeah. The permit was fairly unclear. It said identify these things, and as you do them, cross them off the list and identify another one. In other words, keep 5 going. Now, if you're gonna cross something off the list, that implies that you're supposed to be doing something, so you can cross it off. And that was a cause of concern, and then we finally asked a question from EPA. And incidentally, EPA has been great about, we've had the guy that wrote this permit, Newton Tedder from the Region 1 office in Boston. He has been to the Stormwater Coalition collaborative meeting twice since the program kicked in. And he's basically say, hey, you got a question, email me or call me or whatever. And the DEP representative, Fred Sivian, has also been extremely user-friendly. So, you know, we're getting support from the people that are making us do this. So it's not a one-way street, it's not a dictatorial kind of thing. And, you know, we all understand that this is important. It should be done. And the resistance of communities is because there isn't anybody who's got money to burn. You know, everybody's up to here. Now, you know, mercifully, a lot through Tracy's efforts, we have come away from the brink of receivership that was like we were in back in 2010 to the point where we actually can function as like a real community. But there's some communities that wouldn't have a hope of getting any volunteer help just because of the makeup of the city and the potential dangers and where are the outfalls. If you need to approach an outfall from a boat, it's hard to get volunteers to be tested, okay? And even Newport, a lot of Newport's outfalls. John Eric's put in for a boat, I believe. It's the way to get to them. No other way. So for communities that are sailing fairly close to the wind financially, this is a burden. This is a serious problem. And there are funds out there, there are grants available. But it has people worried. The guy in one large community that I'm familiar with, just doing my job, he has 3 other jobs as well, all of which sound to me way more time consuming than this one, you know, so, and there's just no money to pay a guy. Newburyport was able to hire a person, and they've got, they're in the process of advertising for that individual now, whose job it will be to, you know, under John Eric's direction, make this happen. But he has a staff, he's got one of the people he has now already working on it, putting the notice of intent together for the city. Yes? What have we missed?
We did the
We got-
infiltration.
We got 3 hours to go, it's only 8 o'clock.
We did construction, we did infiltration,
What's that?
we did with testing, we did, I think we hit them all.
I think
Public
we've
involvement,
hit, the
public
intent was to
education.
hit all of the primary, the major tasks. There's lots of little things we have to do that, like, for example, identify 4 potential, you know, hardscape projects. That are not, they're not, I don't think some of them aren't even in the notice because they're a part of something else that we have to do that.
Yeah, good plan.
So am I right in thinking that the notice of intent is due on October 1st?
Yeah,
And then looks like there's a whole other series of things due on June 30th, 2019?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's the schedule?
the testing, the SOPs for, that Yvonne put together, actually we're meeting tomorrow to start, you know, trying to finalize that. That's due. The overall stormwater, I'm sorry, the overall testing IDE plan, which again, Yvonne did a draft. I've done some work on that after Yvonne gave it to me, but that would be probably the next thing we do. And the overall, the major plan,
The stormwater.
stormwater
management plan.
program, quote unquote,
Yeah.
that everything else will become a part of, that is also due then. There's some other odds and ends that I've got them written down somewhere, I can't remember what they are.
And they give us
Pardon?
they gave us a nice calendar
Yeah,
that tells us
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
what's
they've got everything, well, it was nice, but some of them were kind of irrelevant, like catch basins. I mean, we do catch basins anyway. I think it's a reminder for those who don't clean out their catch basins that they ought to start, but they're not a program that has a deadline. I mean, you should have been doing this 20 years ago. It's like that separation of storm sewers. For heaven's sakes, Newburyport separated theirs, all except one. One combined sewer remained, it was about 60 feet long, and it was a real bear to fix, so they didn't fix it. But about 15 years ago, it became easy because there was other work in the area, so they fixed it. But virtually all of the city was taken care of by the end of the 70s. You know, I don't know how the communities that are still have these don't quite get it. But it's the way it is. And apparently, from what I hear, there's not a lot of funding available for fixing that, which is a real problem. Is that what you hear?
A lot of the more urban communities are just facing totally different history of infrastructure and,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Yes.
density and all
Sure.
of that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
it
No,
is-
you can't blame the communities. What is surprising is that there hasn't a big deal been made of this.
Yeah,
I mean, Boston kind of dragged their feet, and all of a sudden, the judge lowered the boom on them. You know, and they did it, they fixed it. Of course, they waited until all the grant money had dried up, so the ratepayers ended up paying for it instead of it being spread across the nation.
so what can, if anyone is listening, or for us to take back to people, like, how can regular citizens of Byfield and Newbury and Plum Island help?
Okay?
What are some ways we should
If
be
anybody
thinking
is interested in volunteering, there are odds and ends of jobs, so they're
of? Yeah,
more than welcome to contact me, and we can, somehow or other, we certainly can put them to work. That's one thing. That won't be too many people, but what everybody can do, because we can't use 50 people in this. I mean, we don't have time to supervise 50 people, or, you know, and it's not that much work anyway. But What are the contributing things? Malfunctioning septic systems, so get familiar with the system, make sure it's working properly. Don't do any of the things that all of the websites and brochures and so forth say don't do. Keep an eye on things, make sure you don't have any breakouts that would indicate that you've got a problem there. Another big contributor is pet waste. Pick up after your dog. Dumping anything in catch basins. It's very tempting because it's out of sight and gone forever. But there's no treatment. That goes straight from that catch basin, it goes straight into that same stream that your kids swim in. You know?
Yeah.
I guess kids still swim, some kids still swim in the river.
They do.
Especially in a hot summer like this one. There were a lot of kids jumping off of Middle Road into the Parker.
Into the park,
Good.
exactly.
I'm glad to see this.
Yeah.
I know there's one place in my part of town where we used to swim out where the railroad tracks crossed Boston Road. And I've been back in town almost 40 years, and I've yet to see anybody swimming there.
In the new
And I've had
swimming
to explain to people where Devil's Den is.
hall? The new
What's
swimming
that?
hall?
Was that
Is that the new swimming hall?
the new swimming hole?
Yes.
No, it's one of them is actually called New Hole.
Yeah.
Fore Rock is upstream of that little stone bridge. That's Fore Rock.
Okay,
And sometimes pronounced Fur Rock.
okay.
Like, anyway, you follow the river down and it goes under the railroad tracks and heads towards the Parker. That's New Hole. And I don't know where either one of them got their names, but those were their names in the 40s. And they're not their names anymore. They're one of those little bits of town history that's totally disappeared.
Well, Four Rock is the name of the
The
Marrow
conservation
Rock.
area,
Right.
yeah.
Is the what?
Four Rock is the name of the Marrowhawk.
Oh, yeah,
conservation
that's
area,
right, they did,
They have
they
started
did grab a
reclaiming
hold of that,
it.
yeah. That was a good thing. And they keep the location of Devil's Den alive. But there were, I would be willing to bet there wasn't one person in town that could tell you where Devil's Den was, or what it was for in the old days,
Yeah,
until Merrilock got in there.
yeah.
That's a great program, that really is. That's really a very good program. Yeah, that was a limestone mine. Back in the colonial times. I've heard people say that was for the masonry buildings in Newburyport, the limestone mortar. That is absolutely not true. It had been shut down long before the first brick building in Newburyport was built. But it was combined with Saugus Ironworks, the bog iron Saugus. That was the first iron development in the colonies, and Newbury's limestone was part of that process, because you need the limestone to get rid of the iron oxide and turn it back into real iron again. And there's two other devil's things that nobody knows about, except just a handful of people my age. This Devil's Pulpit, which is that big glacial erratic, a huge rock the glacier just dumped there, that's sitting right above the road, close to the dump, directly across the street from where you get into Devil's Den. That's it vaguely looks like a pulpit. And Devil's Basin is a small excavation that was done for the purposes of mining limestone, and then it stopped. And that's over across the road from Rick Littlefield's house on Hay Street. Rick Littlefield's house is the one that has the tuna boat on the mailbox. And as you walk back into the woods a couple of 100 yards, and if you're not careful, you'll fall into this. I took some home just to see if that really was limestone, put some uriatic acid on it, of course that fizzes immediately, and it fizzed immediately, so I know I had to replace it.
So where's the pot of gold?
Pardon?
Where's the pot of gold?
I tell you what, if you find one, please share that with me. I've been looking for that all my life.
We heard there's a treasure buried.
What's that?
When we came to town, we heard there's a treasure buried, either that is silver or gold.
Well, by the rock marked A.
Okay.
No, seriously, that's the folklore. There's somebody, a pirate buried, talk to Fred Thurlow, knows the whole story on that one. I know just a little bit. There's a rock along the bank of the Parker River somewhere with an A scribed into it, chiseled into it. And right near there, a substantial pirate treasure was buried, according to the story. And I forget, I knew which pirate it was, I've long since forgotten. But, yeah.
We're gonna be Stormwater.
It's a true legend.
Who's that boat?
It's a true legend.
We're gonna get that boat.
So, any other thoughts, questions, criticisms?
No, I think just a huge thank you for all the work that you've done on this.
Well, as I say, I've been enjoying it. Spent my whole life in various other branches of civil engineering, and it's really kind of fun to do something that is still civil engineering, but is different from anything else I've done. And quite honestly, I hope none of my clients are tuned in on this, but I am thoroughly sick of structural work. I really am. The trouble is I can't do anything else that makes me, so it's a catch-22. To do this job, which I love, I've got to have an office because I don't have room in the house. Okay, so I have an office. I can't afford to have an office. Okay, so I got to do some work. If I do any work at all, I got to carry insurance, and it just goes on and on and on. So I'm building probably about 2/3 of what I did when I was fully employed, back before I retired.
We're all grateful.
But, the bottom line is, if you check the obituary pages, you will find the vast majority of people that are on that page, they're listed as retired. Now, why in the world would I want to join that crowd? Please. If I don't retire, I'm clearly going to live forever.
There you go.
There you go.
Actually, I can't understand why I made it past 45. I never thought I was going to.
You're past 45?
Pardon me?
You're past 45?
A bit, yeah. Well, something like 2 packs a day on the average for 40 years. There aren't many of us that had done that and are still functional, You get too soon old and too late smart.
Yeah, very true.
So we're wrapped up?